There's a moment in every life when the mirror begins to crack, when the image you've spent years maintaining no longer feels like you. You can't quite explain it, but something deep within starts to ache. The dreams that once drove you now feel hollow. The conversations that used to excite you leave you empty. And a quiet voice inside begins to whisper, "There's more than this." At first, you try to silence it. You chase distractions, bury yourself in noise, and convince yourself that everything's fine. But the truth doesn't go away, it waits. It waits for the night you can't sleep, for the moment when success feels meaningless, for the silence after the applause fades. That's when you realize you're standing at the edge of something sacred, the collapse of who you were and the beginning of who you're meant to be. This is not a story of loss, but of becoming, a journey through the ache of awakening, the breaking of illusion, and the quiet beauty of returning home to yourself. Stay until the end. Because what you'll discover isn't just transformation, it's the hidden truth beneath all human pain, that the wound itself is the doorway to wholeness. There's a moment in life that no one warns you about. It doesn't arrive with a crash or a clear sign. It creeps in softly, like a shadow at the edge of a familiar room. You can't explain it, but you start to feel off. The things that used to make you feel alive now leave you strangely empty. You laugh at the same jokes, go through the same routines, see the same faces, but something deep inside no longer feels at home. It's as if a quiet voice beneath all the noise begins whispering, "Something about your life isn't real." You try to ignore it at first. You call it stress, boredom, maybe burnout. You tell yourself to be grateful. After all, you have what many would call a good life. But gratitude can't silence the ache. It lingers in the background, waiting for the moment you're alone, when the distractions fade and you can finally hear the truth you've been avoiding. This isn't depression or drama, it's the first tremor of awakening. It's the soul's way of saying, the life you've built no longer fits the person you're becoming. There's something sacred about this ache, though it doesn't feel that way at first. It feels like loss, like you're losing your spark, your direction, even your sense of who you are. But the truth is, what's dying isn't you. It's the version of you that was created to survive, the one who learned how to please, how to perform, how to blend in, the one who thought being accepted was the same as being loved. You wore that version for so long that it began to feel like your skin. But now, the seams are starting to split. This is the beginning of becoming. Not the glamorous, cinematic kind of becoming, but the painful, private kind. The kind that happens when you start to question everything you once called normal. It's messy, confusing, and sometimes it feels like you're falling apart. But you're not falling apart. You're falling open. The ache is not punishment. It's a signal. It means something deep within you has outgrown the cage you mistook for safety. You may not realize it yet, but this ache is love in disguise. The kind of love that refuses to let you keep living halfway. It pulls you towards something more honest, something real. But before you reach it, you'll have to face the emptiness that comes with letting go. You'll have to walk through the silence between who you were and who you're becoming. That's where you are now, standing on the invisible edge between the life you've built and the truth that's trying to break through. It hurts because growth always asks for a trade. You can't carry both your comfort and your calling. You can't stay asleep and still wake up. And so the ache deepens not to destroy you, but to remind you that you were never meant to stay small. It's the soul's first whisper, saying softly, "It's time." At some point, usually when you were too young to understand why, You started to build a mask, not out of lies, but out of survival. You learned that being yourself didn't always earn love, but being what others wanted did. So you studied people. You paid attention to what made them smile, what made them proud, what made them stay. Slowly, without even noticing, you began to shape yourself into the version that kept you safe. The one that didn't speak too loudly. The one that didn't ask for too much. The one that never made anyone uncomfortable. And it worked for a while. People liked that version of you. Teachers praised it. Friends admired it. Family approved of it. The world rewarded your ability to adapt, to fit in, to hide what was real if it didn't match what was expected. But every time you tucked away a truth, a dream, or a wild feeling just to belong, a small piece of you faded. You became what everyone needed, but forgot what you needed. The mask became a kind of protection, a way to move through life without getting hurt. It was easier to smile when you didn't feel like it than to risk being misunderstood. Easier to nod along than to stand alone. But underneath, a quiet exhaustion began to build, the kind that doesn't come from doing too much, but from being someone you're not. There's a special kind of tiredness that comes from pretending, and it seeps into everything. Deep down, the real you never went away. It just learned to wait behind the polite answers, the forced smiles, the version of you that always seems fine. But when the world goes quiet, when you're finally alone with your thoughts, you can feel it, that pull in your chest, that longing to breathe as yourself again. It's the part of you that remembers what it felt like to be real before the world told you how to be. What no one tells you is that the mask doesn't only hide you from others, it starts to hide you from yourself. You forget what you actually like, what you truly believe, what you once dreamed of. You start to live on autopilot, reacting instead of choosing. The mask begins to feel like your skin, and taking it off feels impossible. After all, who would you be without it? Would anyone still love you if they saw what's underneath? But here's the truth. The mask may have kept you safe, but it also kept you small. It protected you from rejection, but it also kept you from connection. Because people can only love the version you show them. And if that version isn't real, the love never feels real either. The pain you feel now, that quiet restlessness, that sense that something's missing, it's your soul pressing against the mask, trying to breathe. You don't need to tear it off all at once. Just start by noticing when you're wearing it. That's where freedom begins, not in pretending you've never worn a mask, but in finally daring to take it off. It doesn't happen all at once. The betrayal comes quietly. It slips in through the smallest choices, the ones that seem harmless at the time. You say yes when you want to say no. You laugh when something doesn't feel funny. You stay quiet when your heart is screaming to speak. And each time you do, you trade a tiny piece of yourself for approval, for peace, for love that doesn't ask too many questions. You tell yourself it's not a big deal that everyone does it. But slowly, almost invisibly, those little moments become a pattern. You start to feel a distance inside, like your life is happening slightly out of sync with your soul. You show up to the same places, with the same people, but it feels like you're watching yourself from a few steps away. There's the person the world sees, calm, agreeable, reliable. And then there's the person you actually are, hidden behind the curtain, aching to be known. You can feel that gap widening, but you don't know how to close it. You don't even remember when it started. This is the subtle betrayal, not of others, but of yourself. It's the slow forgetting of your own truth in exchange for belonging. It doesn't look dramatic. No one sees it happening. You just start editing yourself, trimming your edges, so you fit more neatly into the shape others expect. You tell yourself you're being kind, flexible, mature, but deep down, you know what it really is: fear. Fear of being too much, too honest, too different. Fear of being left alone with your truth. It's strange how you can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. How you can spend years trying to make everyone else comfortable, and yet never feel truly at home in your own skin. The more you bend to be loved, the further you drift from love that feels real. And the more you perform what you think is expected, the less anyone actually knows you. It's a painful irony to spend your whole life trying to be accepted, only to realize you've accepted a version of yourself that isn't even you. But the soul has a way of remembering what the mind tries to forget. That ache you feel, the one that wakes you in the middle of the night, the one that whispers, "Something's wrong," even when everything looks fine. That's the truth knocking at the door. It doesn't want to punish you. It wants to bring you back. It's reminding you that the cost of pretending is too high, that every small betrayal adds up until one day you look in the mirror and can't recognize who's staring back. The good news is that this realization isn't the end, it's the beginning. Because the moment you notice the betrayal, you've already stopped it. You've stepped back into honesty, even if it hurts. That discomfort you feel now, that's not weakness. That's healing starting to take shape the moment your soul begins to reclaim what you once gave away. It always starts small, not with lightning or revelation, but with restlessness. A strange, aching feeling that something isn't quite right. Even when everything seems fine on the surface, you've done what you were supposed to do. You've chased the goals, built the image, played the part, and for a while it worked. You felt proud, maybe even happy. But now, when the noise fades and the world grows quiet, there's a heaviness in the space where joy used to live. You don't know what it wants, only that it won't go away. You try to outrun it at first. You distract yourself with plans, people, screens, anything that keeps you from sitting in that silence. But no matter how busy you get, the emptiness finds you. It hums underneath every conversation, lingers at the edge of every accomplishment, whispers in the pauses between moments. It's the feeling that you've built a life that looks good, but doesn't feel true. That's when the soul begins to speak, not in words, but in sensations. You'll feel it as tension in your chest, a lump in your throat, a quiet urge to step away from the noise and just breathe. You'll notice it in the moments that move you for no reason: a song, a memory, a line from a stranger that hits deeper than it should. These are not coincidences. They are messages from the part of you that's been waiting patiently, lovingly for you to listen. At first, it can be unsettling. The soul doesn't speak the language of logic or achievement. It doesn't care about titles, timelines, or appearances. It speaks in truth, and truth has a way of undoing the life built on anything less. When you start to hear it, everything that isn't aligned begins to feel unbearable. The job that drains you, the friendships that feel shallow, the routines that keep you numb, they all start to lose their hold. You can no longer pretend that fine is enough. But this is not punishment. It's the invitation you've been unconsciously waiting for, the call to come home to yourself. The pain of this moment comes from resistance, from trying to silence what was meant to guide you. The soul isn't trying to destroy your life. It's trying to awaken it. Soon, you'll realize that the things you're losing are the things that were never truly yours. What's breaking is only the shell, the false comfort that once protected you, but now limits you. The voice rising from within, that quiet knowing, is who you've always been beneath the noise. And once you hear it, You can't unhear it. You'll begin to crave honesty over comfort, depth over distraction, and peace over approval. That's how the soul speaks, not to the mind that wants to control, but to the heart that's finally ready to feel. It doesn't shout, it simply whispers, "It's time to remember who you are." There comes a point when the person you've been pretending to be starts to fall apart, not dramatically, but quietly, like a crack spreading through glass. You wake up one day and realize the life you've built doesn't feel like yours anymore. The clothes, the conversations, the ambitions, they all belong to someone you're slowly outgrowing. What used to feel like pride now feels like pressure. What once gave you purpose now feels empty. And the strange part is, you can't explain why. You just know that something in you no longer fits the image you've spent years maintaining. This is the fracture of identity, the invisible split between the self you show the world and the one that's trying to emerge. It feels like standing between two mirrors, one reflecting who you've been and the other showing glimpses of who you might become. You start to move between them, uncertain which reflection is real. Some days, you cling to the old, to the familiar roles and routines that once made you feel safe. Other days, you catch a flash of the new, a deeper voice, a quieter strength, a truer you. But the in-between is painful. You feel like a stranger in your own life. The people who once understood you now seem distant. The dreams that used to drive you now feel meaningless. Even your own thoughts begin to contradict each other, half of you fighting to hold on, half of you begging to let go. It's confusing, disorienting, and lonely. But this is what awakening feels like at first. Losing the person you thought you were. You might try to fix it by rearranging the outside, changing jobs, cities, relationships, hoping the feeling will fade. But no matter where you go, the fracture follows. Because what's breaking isn't the world around you, it's the illusion within you. The false self is beginning to die, and the real self, the one you've buried under expectations and fear, is trying to breathe again. This death isn't destruction, it's transformation. Every ending inside you is making space for something more authentic to rise. But the mind doesn't see it that way. The mind panics, calling it failure, calling it loss. It doesn't understand that what's falling apart was never truly stable to begin with. It was built on performance, not presence, and the soul can no longer live inside that disguise. If you feel torn right now, it's because both versions of you are still alive, the one you're leaving and the one being born. The pain is their meeting point. One is grieving, the other is growing. And though it feels like you're breaking, what's really happening is integration. The surface self is shattering so that the deeper self can emerge stronger, freer, whole. You're not losing yourself. You're finally meeting the parts of you that were left behind. The fracture isn't your ending, it's your beginning. There comes a moment when everything that once felt solid begins to dissolve, not with explosions, but with silence. The routines, the goals, the people, the dreams that once held your world together suddenly lose their color. You wake up and realize that the life you built, the one you worked so hard to perfect, no longer fills you. The things that used to bring excitement now feel heavy. The conversations that once defined you now feel empty. It's as though someone turned down the volume on your entire existence, and all you can hear is a faint echo of what used to matter. At first, you think something's wrong with you. You try to force yourself to care, to reignite the spark by doing what used to work, chasing achievement, pleasing others, keeping busy. But no matter how hard you try, the feeling won't return. You've outgrown the world you once fit into, And that truth terrifies you. The collapse begins quietly, not in your circumstances, but in your meaning. The why behind your life starts to crumble. This is the soul's earthquake. It shakes the foundations you thought were permanent. Your identity, your beliefs, your relationships, even your sense of control. You start to see how much of your life was built on survival, on doing what you were told, on following the path that looked safest, on becoming who others expected you to be. But survival isn't the same as living. And now, the structures that once protected you are turning into cages. You might resist at first. You might cling to the old ways, the job that pays well but drains you, the relationships that feel familiar but empty, the habits that keep you numb. Letting go feels like dying, because in a way, it is. The identity that carried you this far is collapsing, and part of you wants to hold on, even as it suffocates you. But another part, quieter, deeper, is whispering, let it fall. The collapse isn't cruelty, it's correction. It's life's way of clearing the space that illusion once filled. The hollowness you feel isn't the absence of meaning, it's the space being made for new meaning to emerge. You can't see it yet, but the emptiness is not a void. It's a womb. Something real is trying to be born through you, but it can't take shape while you're still clinging to what was. This stage of transformation feels endless, like being suspended between who you were and who you're becoming. But beneath the rubble of your old life, there's a quiet strength forming a trust that doesn't depend on titles, approval, or certainty. You're beginning to live not from the mind that needs control, but from the heart that seeks truth. The collapse of the known isn't your failure, it's your freedom. When everything false falls away, what's left is real. And though you may not see it yet, the emptiness you fear will soon become the doorway to everything you were meant to find. No one tells you how much it hurts to change. They speak about growth like it's beautiful, and it is, but not in the way people imagine. Real transformation doesn't come wrapped in light. It arrives as loss. It feels like something inside you is being peeled away, layer by layer, until you're raw and exposed. You start to notice that the person you've always been, the one who knew how to fit in, how to stay safe, how to keep everyone comfortable, is slowly fading. And even though that version of you wasn't fully real, it's still painful to watch it die. There's a deep grief that comes with shedding skin. You thought you'd feel free, but instead you feel empty, like you're standing between worlds, no longer belonging to the old, but not yet reborn into the new. You miss who you were, even if that person was built on pretense. You miss the certainty, the control, the illusion of knowing what life was about. Now, everything feels unfamiliar. Every decision feels like walking barefoot on new ground. You'll notice people around you start to shift too. Some don't understand what's happening, and their confusion can sound like criticism. They'll say you've changed, and they're right, but they say it like it's a bad thing. You'll find it harder to explain yourself, harder to fit into conversations that once came easily. It's not arrogance. It's simply that you've stopped speaking the language of pretending. You're beginning to speak the language of truth, and not everyone is ready to hear it. The hardest part of transformation isn't becoming new, it's letting go of the old. You built your identity around it. You invested years into protecting it. But now, that identity feels like clothes that no longer fit. You try to wear them, but they itch, they tighten, they suffocate. So you start to strip them away, your people-pleasing, your self-doubt, your need for validation, and beneath them, you find the person you were always meant to be. But standing there bare is terrifying. You don't yet know how to live without your armor. This is where most people turn back, mistaking discomfort for danger. But the pain isn't a warning sign. It's a birth cry. Every cell in your being is rearranging itself to match your truth. The chaos you feel inside isn't destruction. It's creation in motion. You're not losing everything. You're losing only what was never truly yours. And yes, it's messy. Yes, it hurts. But that's because real becoming demands honesty, and honesty burns through illusion like fire. So let it hurt. Let it fall apart. Because beneath the pain is a new strength, a new peace, a new you, quietly forming. And one day, you'll look back and realize this wasn't the end. This was the shedding before flight, the painful grace of finally growing into yourself. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being abandoned. It comes from awakening. It happens when your eyes start to open, and the world you once knew no longer feels the same. You begin to see beneath things, beneath people's words, beneath the noise, beneath your own patterns, and that clarity changes everything. You notice how much of life is built on pretending. How much of what we call normal is really just a quiet agreement to stay asleep. And when you stop playing along, the distance between you and others begins to grow. At first, you think something's wrong. You wonder why conversations that used to feel easy now feel shallow, why certain friends no longer feel like home, why you crave solitude more than company. You still care about people, but it's like you're tuned to a different frequency now. You can't go back to small talk when your soul is hungry for truth. You can't laugh at the same illusions when you've seen what they cost you. This is the loneliness of awakening, not because you're unloved, but because you're learning to love differently. You're no longer chasing connection through approval or similarity. You're seeking something real, something soul deep. And the truth is, not everyone is ready to meet you there. Some will drift away, not out of malice, but because your growth challenges their comfort. You remind them of what they've buried, of the dreams and truths they've silenced in themselves. You'll be tempted to dim your light, to keep them close, to make yourself smaller, easier, more familiar. But that's not love. That's self-abandonment in disguise. The right ones won't need you to shrink to stay. They'll meet you in your depth, even if it scares them. And those who can't, let them go with compassion. Their path is different, and that's okay. In the silence that follows, you'll feel a strange ache, the kind that sits behind your ribs and hums quietly through your days. But within that ache is beauty. It means you've stepped out of illusion. It means your soul has chosen truth over belonging. And while this kind of loneliness cuts deep, it also clears space for something pure, the kind of peace that doesn't depend on being understood. You'll start to find new companions, not through effort, but through resonance. People who don't just like who you are, but see who you are. Conversations that feel like breathing after years of holding your breath. And until they appear, solitude will be your teacher. You'll learn that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. One emptiness drains you, the other fills you. Because in the quiet, when there's no one left to perform for, you meet the one who's been waiting all along, yourself. And once you meet that person fully, you'll realize the loneliness of awakening was never punishment. It was preparation for a love that begins within and expands outward. Growth is never a straight line. Even when you think you've moved on, the old self still calls your name. It whispers to you in moments of doubt, in the quiet hours when change feels too heavy to carry. It tempts you with comfort, the familiar routines, the predictable emotions, the patterns that once made you feel safe. Part of you misses it, the simplicity, the certainty, the feeling of knowing who you were, even if that version was built on illusion. You tell yourself you've outgrown it, but when life gets hard, the old identity still feels like home. It shows up in subtle ways. You find yourself reacting how you used to, shrinking when you should speak, pretending you don't care when you do, apologizing for taking up space. You catch yourself chasing validation you thought you no longer needed, or falling into habits that numb the discomfort of change. It's not failure, it's memory. The body remembers who you used to be, the tone of your voice, the way you walked, the way you kept yourself small to survive. The mind, too, remembers the rules of the old world, and it clings to them when uncertainty feels unbearable. This is the echo of the old self, the ghost of your former identity, trying to pull you back into what once felt familiar. It doesn't understand that you've outgrown the story it was written into. It doesn't care about truth or evolution. It only cares about safety. That's why it feels so convincing. It tells you that you're losing yourself, when really, you're losing your mask. It tells you that you're making a mistake, when really, you're stepping into freedom. You'll feel this tension, often the tug between who you were and who you're becoming. Some days, the old self will win. You'll slip back into comfort, wear the mask again, pretend for a little while. But it won't fit like it used to. What once protected you now feels suffocating. The conversations you used to enjoy will drain you. The patterns that once felt safe will start to hurt. That's how you'll know you're changing, not because you've completely left the old behind, but because it no longer feels like home. Transformation isn't about erasing who you were. It's about learning to love the parts of you that once settled for less, to hold them with compassion instead of shame. The old self isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that got you this far. It did its job. It kept you alive when you didn't know how else to be. But now, it's time to thank it and let it rest. Because every time you choose truth over comfort, the echo grows fainter. Every time you stand in your new self, even trembling, the old one releases its grip a little more. And slowly, you realize, the echo wasn't trying to stop you, it was just scared of being forgotten. And the moment you meet it with love instead of fear, it finally quiets down, allowing who you truly are to speak louder than ever before. There comes a point in every awakening when you start to question whether it was worth it. You sit in the stillness of your new awareness and think back to the person you used to be, the one who didn't overthink everything, who could blend into the crowd without feeling out of place, who could stay distracted enough to avoid the ache of truth. You remember how simple life seemed then, how easy it was to follow the script, how much lighter it felt to not see so deeply. And in that moment, you begin to wonder, was it really better before? Before awareness? Before depth? Before truth? This is the temptation to turn back. It's the mind's way of trying to protect you from the growing pains of consciousness. Because once you see through illusion, you can't unsee it. Once you taste truth, comfort loses its sweetness. Yet, part of you misses the numbness. It's a strange grief, mourning the ignorance that once kept you safe. You start to envy people who seem fine with surface-level happiness, who can scroll, gossip, perform, and sleep soundly afterward. You used to be one of them. Now you feel like an outsider to your own life. The mind will whisper that you've gone too far, that you've ruined the illusion you needed to survive. It will tell you that this path of depth is too lonely, too heavy, too complicated. It will tell you to go back to who you were, to put the mask back on, to stop asking questions that only bring pain, and you'll be tempted to listen. Because truth strips away the layers that made life comfortable. It dismantles the false security you once called peace. It demands honesty, and honesty, at first, hurts. But here's what the mind forgets. You didn't wake up by accident. Something in you outgrew the old story. Something real wanted to live. The pain you feel now isn't proof you've lost your way. It's the sign that you're walking it. Every awakening begins with confusion. Every expansion begins with grief. You can't build the new while clinging to the old. The bridge between who you were and who you're becoming is built from the ashes of what no longer fits. So yes, it was easier before. But easier and better aren't the same thing. Before awareness, you were comfortable but also disconnected. Before depth, you were liked but not known. Before truth, you were surviving but not living. What you miss isn't the old life. It's the illusion of safety it gave you. In time, the longing to go back will fade. The light that once blinded you will start to feel warm again. And you'll realize that awareness was never the problem. It was the cure. Because even if ignorance feels lighter, only truth can set you free. The temptation to turn back is strong, but the soul has already chosen. And once the soul chooses, there's no going back, only forward, toward what's real. At first, you think awakening is about light, about becoming calm, kind, and endlessly wise. But soon you learn that light, real light, demands you to face the dark. Because what's hidden in your shadow doesn't disappear just because you've ignored it. It waits. It waits for the day you're strong enough to stop pretending. And that day always comes. The descent into shadow begins quietly, often when life feels uncertain or you've grown tired of your own patterns. You start noticing parts of yourself that make you uncomfortable. Jealousy, fear, anger, neediness, shame. The emotions you were taught to suppress begin to rise like ghosts you thought were long gone. You might try to push them back down, but they only grow louder. The truth is, they were never gone, just buried under years of pretending to be good. It's unsettling, realizing how much of yourself you've hidden just to be accepted. You see how often you've played the role of the calm one, the nice one, the one who has it all together while inside, chaos was raging. For so long, you thought these darker emotions made you broken. But now, as they surface, you begin to see something softer. They were never your enemies. They were exiled children of your psyche, carrying the pain and fear you didn't know how to hold. Each part of you that feels ugly or wrong was once created to protect you. Anger shielded your boundaries when no one else did. Jealousy showed you what you longed for but didn't believe you deserved. Fear tried to keep you safe in a world that once hurt you. Even shame, that heavy, silent companion, formed to stop you from being rejected again. These emotions are not signs of your failure. They are signs of your humanity. Meeting your shadow isn't about fighting it. It's about listening. You begin to realize that healing doesn't mean becoming pure. It means becoming whole. It's standing in front of the mirror of your psyche and saying, I see you. You belong too. The parts you've denied start to soften in that light. What was once rage turns into clarity. What was once fear becomes intuition. What was once shame transforms into humility. But the process isn't easy. Some days, it feels like you're being swallowed by darkness. You'll question whether you're regressing, whether the pain means you've gone backward, but you haven't. You're descending, so you can reclaim what you left behind. Because only by embracing your shadow can you become real. Eventually, the descent starts to feel less like falling and more like returning. You realize that the dark isn't evil, it's simply the part of you that was unloved. And once love touches it, it changes shape. That's the secret no one tells you. The light you were chasing was hidden in the very darkness you feared. The descent into shadow isn't the end of your awakening, it's where it truly begins. There comes a moment in every transformation when you can't hold it together anymore. You've tried everything, the control, the logic, the plans, but nothing seems to stop the unraveling. The more you fight it, the faster it falls apart. It feels like life is cornering you, stripping away every illusion, every role, every mask you've ever built to protect yourself. You reach a point where pretending doesn't work, and strength feels like a lie. That's when you meet the breaking point, the place where the ego finally cracks. It's not a glamorous moment. It's messy, raw, and quiet. There are no grand realizations, no lightning bolts of wisdom, just exhaustion. You stop running because you have nowhere left to run. You stop trying to fix yourself because you finally see there's nothing to fix. The person you've been holding together, the achiever, the caretaker, the fighter, begins to dissolve. And though it feels like you're falling apart, what's really happening is surrender. The breaking point isn't destruction, it's initiation. It's the moment life asks you to stop fighting the current and let yourself be carried. You've spent years trying to hold control, to manage every feeling, to force every outcome, but the soul doesn't work that way. It doesn't need control. It needs space. And the ego, with all its plans and fears, can't give it that space. So it must collapse. The collapse is terrifying because it feels like death. You lose the sense of who you thought you were, the image that once defined you. Maybe it's the role you played in your family, the reputation you built, the identity you wore like armor. When that begins to crumble, you feel naked, exposed to the unknown. The mind screams, "This can't be right. You're losing everything." But beneath the panic, something else is happening, something quiet and sacred. The soul is breathing for the first time in years. You begin to notice a strange peace underneath the chaos, a stillness beneath the fear. It's the silence that appears after the storm, the kind that doesn't need to prove or explain anything. In that silence, you begin to realize that nothing real is ever lost. Only the false falls away. The masks, the roles, the control, they were never who you were. They were just the scaffolding around your true self, and now that scaffolding is no longer needed. The breaking point is where the real transformation begins. It's the moment you trade control for trust, resistance for acceptance. You stop trying to escape your humanity and finally allow yourself to feel it fully. The pain, the confusion, the uncertainty. And in that surrender, something shifts. You don't rise immediately, but you start to see that maybe falling apart was never the problem. Maybe this is what freedom looks like, not holding everything together, but allowing everything to fall into place. When the ego breaks, the soul finally breathes. And in that first quiet breath, you realize what's dying isn't you. It's the illusion that you ever had to be anything other than who you already are. When the storm finally passes, it doesn't announce itself. There's no grand moment of triumph, no instant clarity, just stillness, the kind that feels both strange and sacred. After so much chaos, your first instinct is to brace for more, to wait for the next wave to crash. But it doesn't. For the first time, in what feels like forever, nothing is demanding your energy. The noise is gone. The fight is over. What's left is silence, vast, unfamiliar, and oddly tender. At first, it feels like emptiness. You look around the ruins of your old life and see everything that's fallen. The identities, the beliefs, the relationships that couldn't survive the truth. You expect to feel grief, but what you feel instead is weightlessness. The constant striving, the inner tension, the need to prove or protect, all of it has burned away. What remains isn't nothing. It's space. The kind of space that life rushes to fill with something real. You begin to notice the small things again. The sound of your own breath, the way sunlight hits the floor, the rhythm of your heartbeat, steady and unhurried. It's as if the world has slowed down, or maybe you've finally stopped running fast enough to see it. You realize how much of your life was spent in motion chasing peace, while unknowingly running from it. Now, in the stillness, you discover that peace was never something to be reached. It was what remained when the reaching stopped. This silence is not lonely. It's alive. It hums softly beneath everything. A quiet presence that holds you without demanding anything in return. For the first time, you don't need to fix or perform or explain. You can simply exist raw, real, and whole. You're not yet sure who you're becoming, and that uncertainty no longer scares you. Because in this stillness, you begin to sense something greater. A faint, steady guidance that comes not from the mind, but from deep within. It's strange how peace can feel so uncomfortable at first. You're used to chaos. It's what you've known. So when life suddenly feels calm, part of you mistakes it for emptiness. But if you stay with it, if you breathe and listen, you'll hear something beneath the quiet, a whisper of aliveness, the soul stretching its wings. You'll realize that stillness isn't the absence of life. It's the presence of truth. This is the space where healing begins to take root. Where the old self has crumbled, the new self doesn't rush to replace it. It grows slowly, patiently, from the soil of surrender. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be here in the quiet, in the space that used to scare you. Because in that silence, you'll find what the storm was clearing room for all along. You, the real you, unarmored, unhurried, and finally at peace. There comes a time after the storm when you stop searching outside for answers. You've looked everywhere, in books, advice, relationships, routines, and yet none of it feels right anymore. The words of others start to sound distant, as if spoken through a wall. It's not arrogance. It's readiness. Something deep within you begins to stir, a gentle knowing that doesn't come from thought, but from silence. This is the voice of the inner teacher, the part of you that has always known the way, waiting for you to finally listen. It doesn't speak in loud declarations or dramatic signs. It moves softly, like wind through trees. Sometimes it arrives as intuition, a quiet pull towards something you can't yet explain. Other times, it comes as resistance, a heaviness that tells you when something isn't right, even if it looks perfect on paper. The inner teacher doesn't argue or persuade. It simply whispers, this way, not that. You start to notice its presence everywhere in your dreams, your body, your emotions. The dream that repeats until you finally pay attention. The tightness in your chest when you're about to make a choice that betrays your truth. The deep calm that follows when you decide to trust yourself instead. This is how wisdom speaks not in words but in feelings. The mind analyzes. The soul knows. And once you start listening, life becomes less about figuring things out and more about remembering what you already know. But trusting that voice isn't easy. For years, you were taught to doubt it, to seek authority, validation, and logic instead. You learned to silence your instincts to avoid being wrong, strange, or misunderstood. So at first, the inner teacher's whispers feel uncertain, fragile, even imaginary. You'll question if it's real. You'll look for proof. But intuition doesn't offer proof when it offers peace. And the more you follow it, the clearer it becomes. Eventually, you begin to see how kind this wisdom truly is. It never shames or commands. It doesn't say, "You should have known better." It says, "You know now." It meets you exactly where you are and guides you step by step, not with force, but with presence. It doesn't rush. It simply waits for you to match its stillness. As you learn to trust it, your relationship with life changes. You stop chasing certainty and start cultivating faith, not blind faith in something outside of you, but quiet trust in what lives within you. You start realizing that guidance doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from surrendering deeper. The voice of the inner teacher doesn't need to be found. It's been speaking all along, beneath the noise, beneath the fear. And one day, in a moment of stillness, you'll realize that the wisdom you've been searching for has always been your own soft, patient, and waiting to be heard. There's a quiet beauty in what happens after the darkness, a kind of light that isn't blinding, but soft. It's not the return of who you were before the pain, but the emergence of something gentler, wiser, and strangely pure. After everything you've seen, after all the walls you've torn down, something unexpected begins to grow in the space where the fear used to live. It's not perfection. It's innocence, not the kind that comes from ignorance, but the kind that comes from understanding and still choosing to love. For so long, you protected your heart like it was fragile glass. You learned to hide it, to harden it, to guard it against disappointment. Pain taught you that openness leads to hurt, so you closed yourself off and called it strength. But the truth is, the heart never stops wanting to love. Even under the armor, even through the scars, it waits patient, hopeful for the moment it can trust again. And one day, almost without noticing, it does. This return of innocence doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It's subtle, a small kindness that moves you unexpectedly, a moment of forgiveness that softens your chest, a sunset that makes you stop and feel grateful for no reason at all. You begin to sense life again, not through the mind that analyzes, but through the heart that feels. The world doesn't seem as harsh as it once did. People aren't as frightening. You realize that behind everyone's defenses is the same longing to be seen, to be safe, to be loved. You haven't forgotten what hurt you. You've simply stopped letting it define you. You no longer confuse innocence with weakness. Real innocence is the courage to stay open in a world that taught you to close. It's the strength to look at life, with all its mess and uncertainty, and say, "I'm still willing to love anyway." That kind of softness isn't naive. It's power in its purest form. The heart that reopens after being broken is never the same as before. It's slower, more discerning, but infinitely more real. It no longer gives itself to everything, only to what feels true. And it doesn't chase love anymore. It recognizes that love was never something to find, but something to allow. As innocence returns, so does wonder. The simplest things begin to feel miraculous again. You stop needing life to make sense and start letting it move through you. You smile without reason. You trust without proof. You begin to live not from fear, but from faith. Not the kind that denies pain, but the kind that knows pain is no longer the whole story. This is what it means to be unburdened. Not untouched by life, but undefended by it. You've seen the darkness, and yet you choose to open. You've known the wound, and yet you dare to love. That's not the loss of innocence. That's its return. No one tells you that healing comes with grief, that every step toward authenticity feels like a small funeral for the person you used to be. You think growth will feel like freedom, and eventually, it does, but first it feels like loss. Because to become who you truly are, you have to say goodbye to the version of yourself that carried you this far. The one who played small, stayed quiet, or pretended to be fine just to survive. You don't realize how attached you are to that version until it starts to fade. It's a strange kind of heartbreak, mourning a self that was never fully real, but was still yours. You remember how hard that person tried, how they smiled through pain, how they worked for love, how they hid their truth just to belong. They weren't fake, they were afraid. They were doing their best with what they knew. And now, as you grow beyond them, you feel both sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for how long you lived behind the mask, and gratitude that you're finally brave enough to take it off. This grief can catch you off guard. You'll be in a quiet moment, feeling proud of your progress, and suddenly a wave of sadness hits. You'll miss your old dreams, your old relationships, your old ways of being. You'll miss the certainty that came with fitting in. But nostalgia can be tricky. It often paints the past softer than it was. If you look closer, you'll remember that even in those moments, something inside you ached for more. Growth asks you to let go of identities that once defined you. The caretaker, the overachiever, the one who never needed help. They kept you safe once, but now they keep you small. You can honor them without becoming them again. Because growth isn't about rejecting your past. It's about integrating it with compassion. It's sitting with your younger self and saying, "You did what you had to do. I understand. I forgive you." Forgiving yourself is one of the hardest parts. It's easier to forgive others than to face the ways you betrayed your own soul. The times you stayed silent. The times you ignored your truth. The times you accepted less because you didn't think you deserved more. But even those choices were acts of survival. You were not weak. You were trying to stay alive in a world that rewarded pretending. And now, as you begin to live without those defenses, it's natural to feel both lighter and lonelier. But that emptiness you feel isn't loss, it's space. Space for the person you're becoming. Space for a self that no longer needs to hide. So let yourself grieve. Let yourself miss the old version, but don't reach for her again. You're not abandoning her, you're freeing her. The pain of growth is the price of truth. And one day, when the tears dry and the silence feels peaceful, you'll realize that what you were really mourning wasn't your past. It was the time you spent forgetting who you are. There comes a moment when you begin to see the pain differently. For so long it felt like punishment, as if life was against you, stripping away everything you loved, breaking you open for no reason. But now, with distance and tenderness, you start to understand. It wasn't cruelty, it was initiation. Every loss, every heartbreak, every silence that felt unbearable, they were all guiding you toward consciousness, toward truth, toward yourself. The unseen initiation doesn't happen in temples or sacred ceremonies. It happens in ordinary moments at 2 a.m., when you can't sleep, when someone you trusted walks away, when the dream you worked for collapses. It happens when life humbles you so deeply that you stop reaching outward and begin listening inward. That's where the transformation begins, not in glory, but in surrender. You see, awakening is not an achievement. It's a dismantling. The pain that once felt like destruction was really your soul clearing space for something more real. It was tearing down the walls built from fear, pride, and illusion. The moments that shattered you were not meant to ruin you. They were meant to show you what could no longer stay. You thought you were breaking down, but you were being broken open. When you're in it, it feels like chaos. You question everything: your worth, your purpose, your place in the world. You think you've lost direction, but the truth is, you're being rerouted. Life has a way of taking away what you cling to until you have no choice but to trust what can't be seen. That's the initiation, walking through the dark without needing proof that light exists. There's a sacred rhythm to this process. Every ending is followed by a pause, a stillness where nothing makes sense, but everything is changing beneath the surface. It's like the seed buried underground, invisible, yet already becoming something new. You can't rush this stage. You can only surrender to it. You can only let the pain do its work, softening what was hard, burning what was false, reshaping what was ready. And when you finally begin to rise again, it's different this time. You don't rise out of desperation or pride. You rise quietly, with humility. You carry the same pain that once broke you, but it no longer owns you. It has become your wisdom, your empathy, your strength. You no longer need to prove your worth because you've met it in the fire. This is what the unseen initiation teaches, that consciousness is not born from comfort. It's born from collapse, from the moments that bring you to your knees. The pain was never there to punish you. It was there to prepare you to strip away everything that wasn't love, until all that remained was truth. And when you reach that point, you'll see that what felt like the end was really your beginning, the moment your soul finally remembered what it came here to become. There comes a point in every deep transformation when you must learn to walk alone, not because you've failed, not because no one cares, but because truth requires solitude. You've spent most of your life surrounded by noise, opinions, expectations, comparisons, advice. For a while, that noise helped shape you. It gave you belonging, direction, identity. But now, it only distracts. You can feel it, the quiet pull away from the crowd, the desire to be still long enough to hear your own voice again. This is the courage to stand alone, the sacred aloneness, where truth begins to mature. At first, solitude feels like exile. You miss the comfort of being understood, the easy validation that comes from being part of something familiar. You scroll through your memories, longing for the simplicity of old connections. But when you reach for them, they don't fit the same. The conversations feel thinner, the laughter forced. You can't return to who you were, and you're not yet who you're becoming. It's a strange, in-between space, empty, but also alive with possibility. In that space, something extraordinary happens. Without the constant pull of other people's energies, your own essence starts to surface. You begin to sense what's truly yours, your thoughts, your feelings, your pace, your truth. You start realizing how much of your life was shaped by imitation, how much of your identity was built around being what others needed. Alone, there's no one left to impress, no one to perform for. You meet yourself in raw form, unfiltered, unedited, real. And at first, that honesty stings. But slowly, it starts to feel like home. This solitude is not loneliness. It's purification. It strips away the noise so that the signal of your soul can finally come through. You start to notice small shifts, your intuition sharpening, your energy returning, your heart softening. You realize that you no longer need constant reassurance, because your compass is inside you now. The approval you used to crave begins to lose its power. The world outside may still be loud, but inside, you've found quiet ground. Standing alone doesn't mean rejecting others. It means no longer abandoning yourself to keep them. It means you can love people without losing your center. It means you can listen without absorbing, give without depleting, and stay present without pretending. Solitude teaches you boundaries, not as walls, but as devotion to your own truth, your own rhythm, your own becoming. Eventually, you stop fearing the silence. You start welcoming it. You realize that everything real love, purpose, wisdom grows in stillness first. You see that this solitude isn't the end of your journey with others. It's the beginning of your journey with yourself. So let the world move without you for a while. Let people misunderstand your quiet. The ones meant for your next chapter will meet you there not because you reached for them, but because you became someone who no longer needs to. This is where individuality ripens into authenticity, and authenticity blooms into peace. Standing alone is not isolation. It's initiation the moment your soul stands firmly in its own light. There's a moment, somewhere after solitude becomes peace, when the world begins to look different. You start noticing patterns not in events, but in yourself. The people who frustrate you, the ones who trigger you, the ones who feel impossible to understand, they begin to reveal something deeper. You start to see that they aren't just people passing through your life. They're mirrors, showing you what still lives in the shadows of your own heart. Every person, every conflict, every ache in connection reflects a part of you still waiting to be seen, still longing to be loved. At first, this realization feels uncomfortable. It's easier to blame than to look within. Easier to say, they hurt me, they're wrong, they need to change. But the more conscious you become, the harder it is to keep that story alive. You begin to recognize yourself in everyone. Your fears, your hopes, your insecurities, your longing to be enough. You see your own reflection in their anger, your own avoidance in their silence, your own pain in their distance. Suddenly, what used to feel personal becomes symbolic. Every encounter becomes a conversation between your soul and the world. This doesn't mean you excuse cruelty or accept mistreatment. It means you start looking for meaning beneath reaction. When someone triggers you, instead of fighting back or shutting down, you ask, what part of me is this touching? Sometimes it's a forgotten wound. Sometimes it's an unexpressed truth. Sometimes it's love that was never given permission to exist. The mirror shows you not to punish, but to free. It gives you the chance to reclaim what was lost through awareness. You start to realize that the outer world has always been your teacher. Every heartbreak showed you your capacity for love. Every rejection revealed the ways you abandoned yourself. Every judgment you held toward others pointed to the qualities you hadn't yet accepted within. The more you see this, the less you resist life. You stop needing everything to be fair or easy, and instead begin to ask, what is this here to teach me? This shift changes everything. The world no longer feels like something happening to you, but something happening through you. You begin to see relationships as sacred exchanges, mirrors that reflect not perfection, but potential. Even conflict becomes sacred ground, because it shows you where peace still needs to grow. The people who once triggered you most often become your greatest catalysts, unknowingly helping you reclaim your wholeness. Over time, this mirror view softens you. You stop seeing enemies and start seeing reflections. Compassion replaces judgment. Understanding replaces resentment. And slowly, the boundaries between self and other begin to blur, not in a way that dissolves your individuality, but in a way that reminds you of your shared humanity. The world has always been your mirror, but only now do you see it clearly. Every moment, every joy, every pain, every person is a reflection of your inner landscape. And as you heal within, the reflections outside begin to change. Not because the world suddenly becomes perfect, but because you finally see it as it is a perfect teacher, showing you everything you need to remember about love. There comes a day when pretending simply stops working. The mask that once protected you now feels heavy. The performance that once earned you love now leaves you empty. You're tired not from doing too much, but from being someone you're not. And in that exhaustion, something shifts. You stop chasing approval. Stop trying to prove your worth. Stop editing yourself to be more acceptable. For the first time, you start choosing honesty over image, truth over performance. This is the birth of authenticity. Soft, quiet, but profoundly powerful. You used to think power meant control, the ability to convince, achieve, or impress. But now you see that real power is something entirely different. It's presence. It's the ability to stand in your truth without needing anyone to agree with it. It's not loud or demanding. It doesn't need attention or validation. It's calm, grounded, certain in its quietness. That's why it feels soft, because it doesn't fight to exist. It simply is. At first, this new way of being feels strange. You might hesitate before speaking your truth, afraid it will cost you love or approval. And sometimes it does. Not everyone will understand the version of you that no longer performs. Some people will drift away because they were attached to your mask, not your essence. It hurts, but it's also clarifying. You realize that anything real will never require you to shrink. Living authentically doesn't mean being perfect or brutally honest at all times. It means being aligned. It's saying yes when you mean yes, and no when you mean no. It's showing up as you are, even when you're uncertain. It's being transparent enough to say, I don't know yet, but I'm learning. It's allowing yourself to be seen, flaws and all, without the desperate need to manage how others perceive you. Because the truth is, the right people don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be real. As you begin to live this way, life starts to feel lighter. The energy you once spent hiding now becomes available for creating, loving, and living. Your relationships deepen because they're based on honesty, not performance. Your choices become simpler because they come from clarity, not fear. You begin to see that authenticity isn't an achievement, it's a return. You're not becoming someone new. You're remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And the beauty of this soft power is that it doesn't seek to dominate, it inspires. When you live authentically, you give others silent permission to do the same. Your presence becomes a mirror that reflects truth without judgment. You stop trying to change the world and instead embody what's missing from it: realness. This is the soft power of authenticity, the quiet strength of a person who no longer needs to pretend. No masks, no roles, no fear, just truth, just presence, just life, lived as it was always meant to be: honest, open, and real. There comes a moment on the path when the war inside you begins to end. For so long, you've divided yourself into light and dark, the parts you're proud of and the parts you've tried to hide. You chased the light, believing goodness meant purity, that peace meant perfection. But the deeper you journeyed, the clearer it became. Healing isn't about erasing the dark. It's about learning to hold it with love. The shadow was never your enemy. It was your teacher, waiting patiently to be seen. At first, this realization feels unsettling. You spent years trying to fix, purify, and transcend your flaws. You wanted to become whole by becoming only the good parts. But wholeness doesn't come from separation, it comes from integration. You begin to understand that light without shadow is incomplete, just as shadow without light is directionless. Every wound carries wisdom. Every flaw holds a fragment of truth. Every darkness you've faced has shaped the depth of your compassion. Integration happens quietly. You stop labeling your emotions as good or bad, right or wrong. Anger, once feared, becomes a guide that points toward your boundaries. Fear, once rejected, becomes a compass that shows where courage is needed. Even grief becomes sacred proof that you've loved deeply enough to lose. Slowly, you realize that nothing inside you was ever meant to be exiled. Every part of you, even the most painful, is simply asking to be seen without judgment. As light and dark begin to move together, something softens. The constant inner conflict, the need to fix yourself, fades. You stop trying to be spiritual by rejecting your humanity. You start to see that being human is spiritual. The mess, the emotion, the imperfection, that's where the divine hides. The shadow was never proof of your unworthiness. It was proof of your depth. You might notice that the people and situations that once triggered you no longer hold the same power. It's not that life becomes easier, it's that you're no longer resisting it. When anger comes, you breathe. When sadness rises, you listen. You no longer drown in your feelings, nor do you run from them. You let them flow through you, trusting they carry messages, not curses. That is what it means to integrate, to allow everything within you to belong. And something miraculous happens when you do. You become whole, not perfect, not polished whole. The light within you stops fighting the dark, and together they create balance, harmony, truth. You start to feel grounded, rooted in both heaven and earth, both spirit and flesh. The same darkness that once frightened you now gives you depth, empathy, and strength. This is the quiet completion of the inner journey, the moment when you realize that nothing inside you was ever wrong. The shadow and the light were never meant to destroy each other. They were meant to dance. And in their union, you discover what wholeness truly is. Not the absence of darkness, but the presence of love big enough to hold it all. There comes a quiet turning point when you stop needing to prove who you are. For so long, you've tried to explain yourself to be seen, to be validated, to be understood. You've twisted words to make people get it, adjusted your tone to make them stay, softened your truth so it wouldn't be too much. You wanted peace, but you were searching for it in the wrong place, in the eyes of others. And one day, you simply grow tired, not bitter, not defeated, just done. Done chasing acceptance. Done performing for belonging. Done shrinking for understanding that never comes. At first, this kind of letting go feels lonely. You wonder if it means giving up. But it isn't surrender to defeat, it's surrender to truth. You begin to see that real peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from understanding yourself. You no longer need to prove your worth to anyone because you can finally feel it from within. It's not arrogance, it's quiet clarity, the kind that doesn't need defense. There's a freedom that appears when you stop trying to control how others see you. You realize their perception was never your responsibility. People can only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves. Some will misinterpret your silence as pride, your confidence as coldness, your boundaries as distance. Let them. You no longer need to edit your truth to fit someone else's comfort. The ones who can truly see you will never need convincing. This is the peace that follows authenticity, the calm that comes after the storm of trying too hard. You stop rehearsing your worth in your mind. You stop replaying old conversations, wishing you'd said more or less. You stop over-explaining your pain to people who have no space for it. You start saving your energy for what matters, for creation, for stillness, for connection that flows naturally. without negotiation. In this peace, life slows down. You begin to enjoy being misunderstood because it means you're no longer molding yourself to be liked. You start laughing at what used to bother you, feeling lighter in situations that once drained you. You understand that not everyone is meant to walk with you, and that's not tragedy, it's alignment. You no longer chase what isn't meant to stay. This is what maturity feels like. Not harder, but softer. Not more guarded, but more grounded. You learn that you don't need to prove your light for it to exist. The sun doesn't explain its warmth. The river doesn't apologize for its flow. They just are, and that's enough. And so are you. When you stop trying to prove, you begin to be. You realize that peace was never about convincing others of your truth. It was about finally standing in it. And in that stillness, where nothing needs defending and nothing needs to be earned, you find freedom. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that simply breathes, quiet, certain, and completely at home in itself. There comes a moment, after all the breaking and surrendering, when life starts to move again, not with force, but with ease. You stop pushing against the current. Stop trying to make everything happen the way you think it should. Instead, you begin to move in rhythm with something larger, something quiet, natural, and deeply right. This is alignment. It doesn't mean everything suddenly becomes easy. It means everything finally starts to make sense. You begin to notice that when you act from truth, life responds differently. Doors open that you once had to beg for. The right people appear without effort. Things that used to drain you now feel lighter. It's not luck, it's resonance. You're no longer living from fear or image. You're living from essence. The choices you make now come from a deeper place, not from what will impress others, but from what brings peace. Not from what you think you should do, but from what your soul quietly says yes to. Alignment doesn't mean the absence of struggle. The world will still challenge you, but you won't feel lost inside it anymore. Even when things fall apart, you sense the purpose behind it. You trust that every redirection carries meaning, that every delay protects you from something not meant for you. The anxiety that once ruled your life begins to dissolve, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You're no longer trying to control everything. You're learning to cooperate with what is. In this state, joy returns, not the fleeting kind that depends on outcomes, but a steady, quiet joy that hums beneath everything. It's the joy of honesty, of congruence, of finally being where you belong. You wake up without dread because you're not living against yourself anymore. Even simple things, a walk, a meal, a conversation begin to feel sacred. You start to see beauty in the ordinary, and it fills you in a way achievement never could. The more aligned you become, the less you need to chase. You stop trying to force timing or prove worth. You realize that when you live in truth, what's meant for you recognizes you naturally. You don't have to reach for it, you only have to be ready for it. And readiness doesn't come from striving, it comes from stillness. This is what it means to flow. To trust that your life is not working against you, but unfolding through you. You begin to see that every detour was part of your becoming, that every heartbreak cleared space for what's real. Alignment is not a reward for perfection. It's the natural state of a soul that has stopped pretending. And in that place, joy doesn't need a reason. It simply arises, steady and effortless, like breath. You realize that life was never meant to be easy. It was meant to be true. And when you live in truth, even the hard days feel meaningful, because they belong to something whole. This is the quiet joy of alignment, not the end of the journey, but the moment you finally feel at home within it. There comes a moment, almost unnoticed, When the search finally ends, you've spent so long moving through darkness, shedding layers, facing fears, grieving old selves, and learning to stand alone. You fought, surrendered, and started over more times than you can count. And then, one day, there is no more fighting left to do. The ache that once drove you to question everything begins to soften. The storm inside you quiets, not because you've escaped it, but because you've learned to live within it. What once felt like chaos now feels like rhythm. What once felt like breaking now feels like becoming. You start to see the story differently. The pain that once felt senseless begins to make sense. Every heartbreak, every loss, every silence, they were never punishments. They were invitations. Each one was shaping you, refining you, pulling you closer to what's real. The wound that once consumed you now glows faintly with wisdom. It no longer defines you, it guides you. You no longer hide from your pain. You listen to it. You let it teach you how to love, how to let go, how to be free. And in that listening, peace returns. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything being perfect, but the kind that stays even when life isn't. The kind that doesn't ask why me anymore, because it finally understands that none of it was random. The ache was never there to destroy you. It was love disguised as loss trying to guide you home. You realize now that the entire journey was a homecoming. Every breakdown led you closer to the truth. Every ending was really a return. You were never moving away from yourself. You were circling back, learning through contrast what you had forgotten, that you were already whole. The soul doesn't grow by adding more light, but by remembering it was never separate from it. You no longer crave answers the way you used to. You no longer rush to fix what feels uncertain. Instead, you trust, you allow, you breathe. You understand that life is not something to master, it's something to dance with. You are no longer the person who began this journey, desperate for meaning and afraid of change. You've become the space that can hold it all, the fear and the faith, the sorrow and the joy, the ending and the beginning. And so you stop searching for the destination, because you finally understand there isn't one. There's only this quiet presence, this gentle awareness, this moment of being. You are not broken. You never were. You were simply unfolding layer by layer into the truth that has been waiting inside you all along. The wound becomes wisdom. The pain becomes peace. And the ache, that deep, haunting ache that once felt like a curse, reveals itself for what it always was: love, calling you home to yourself.